All right. So I'm going to start with two posts. We are going to read more of Towards Soviet America, but I wanted to start with two posts that are related to this and why. The whole point of the book Towards Soviet America, and I know I'm reading it live with you, but I do have some little bit of background just to tell you that the point of it is William Z. Foster is trying to articulate the feeling and the moment in 1932 where America and many Westerners, but specifically Americans, are sitting through the Great Depression and they're struggling and they don't know when it's going to end. And they think this is the end of the system. And what else can we do? What other systems are there? And they're looking at the Soviet Union and they're wondering, why aren't they affected by this? What's going on? And what William Z. Foster is posing is explaining the problems of capitalism and then explaining why people are looking beyond capitalism to something else. Well, if you look at a couple of posts, and I'll just zero in on this, Andrew Yang is talking about the same thing. Now, he is not a Marxist. He is not someone who's probably a huge fan of the Soviet Union, but he is, I guess, a modern Democrat socialist and certainly is somebody who was ahead of the curve on UBI. UBI just being one of many comments that and politicized commentary around socialism in America and the West. Now, as I say, it's not Marxism. But I want to talk about this because this is related to the concept of people struggling in America looking for something else beyond their system. So let's listen to what he has to say, and then we'll circle back. So
Knows that
let's
there's this massive
start
backlash
from the
coming their way.
beginning.
Check it out. You tend to tax things that you want to discourage and you want less of. And we're going to be in a position where we want to shore up labor in every quarter, in every organization and environment. We should actually try to stop taxing labor because
Tax the agents instead, the
yes,
AI agents?
exactly, Becky. And by the way, Dario Amodei, the second half of his statement, he said, we're going to automate away the white collar jobs and you should tax us. And since when does the CEO of a major company raise his hand and say, hey, tax me and mine? Because he sees the writing on the wall and he knows that there's this massive backlash coming their way. Check it out. You tend to
Right.
tax
So
things that you want to discourage and you want less.
now what he's saying here is tax the agent. So when this person posted, he's right. Taxing AI companies will be the cornerstone of post labor economy, etc. So a couple things. Number one, um, a post labor society. I don't know if we should ever have a post labor society because you do need people to work. You need people to function in society, right? So if you have robotics run by AI, humans should have input because human labor input is where the value is created, especially if you understand, Marx economics and economics in general. The reason that you have the falling tendency rate of profit, the problem of glut, the problem of overproduction, is as you reduce the human labor input, that value component in the equation of what the pricing is and what the surplus value in the equation is continues to drop. So what you want to do is not encourage a post-labor society. But I understand the concept here. People aren't working as much. People are getting replaced. What do we do, right? So Andrew Yang is, I think he's on the right track in terms of we need to change how we tax. Now, the funny thing is that this was talked about about 200 years ago, and and this is already implemented in countries like China. So for China, they have a business. It works as a factory, right? Let's say the factory is in, the middle of town or wherever, and they pay taxes on their property. They lease the land. They can't own the land. They can't own the property. The physical property, the land is intellectually owned by the state, which is owned by the public. So they have the tax burden. The tax burden is not on the individual. This affects the whole dynamics of the society. If you think about a Western country, you think about America, we always talk about tax incentives. Well, tax incentive is a cute way of saying no to low taxes. But no to low taxes for the business means that the tax burden falls on the individuals. The individuals are the employees of the business. The individuals are the consumers of the business. The individuals are the people that live in the town where the business happens to be. That can't continue if you want to squeeze people out of the labor force, which I already think is a bad idea. Do you understand? That's why people are starting to question, how is this going to function? If you're crushing us on one side and then you're hammering me on the other side, I have no place to go. Okay? So this is related. This is why William Z. Foster wrote this book. This is why this was published. And this is why people are turning not just to copy China or copy the Soviet Union or copy Vietnam or copy Cuba. It's not about copying. It's about borrowing from these societies what works and adopting them to American characteristics. But it has to be rooted in a principle of a political and economic system that is, as my colleague Caitlin Maupin would say, a government of action. It has to be rooted in something, okay? It has to be rooted in a principle that applies to the working people of that country, not just a false trickle down promise. Now let's get back to the book, right? So where we left off, come on, for those who want to follow along, it's page 20. So the decaying capitalist system. And as I said before, I am doing a little commentary. I am reading the book live, but I'm not reading it in its entirety on this channel. I am going to um I am going to yeah, let's see. I'll put something on. Here, I'll put something cute in the background. History of watch how negative this is. Soviet Union. Yeah, I know. I'm being a jerk. I know. It's gonna be usually it's the bloody history or whatever. Let's just put this on the background.
You want
I'm being a jerk. So, like I said, and what I'm doing is as I read it, I'm not going to read it all on the channel, but I'll read parts of it. I encourage you guys to buy the book. I encourage you to do this. Like I said, I'm not, there are people who do a great job, like Socialism for All, etc., who read entire books online from Marxist.org and things like that. And all this material is out there. I'm just, just doing a little commentary and reading some portions of it live with you. Okay? So, anyway, the decaying capitalist system. In recent years, especially since the beginning of the present economic crisis, the process of concentration of capital has been greatly speeded in all sections of capitalist economy and in all capitalist countries in the United States. This has been marked by the wholesale wiping out of small business, the mergers of banks, the liquidation of stock holdings of the petty bourgeois, the confiscation of great areas of farmland by foreclosure, etc. This rapid concentration of capital intensifies all the contradictions of capitalism. It is produced together with the unparalleled depth, the breadth of economic crisis and mass starvation previously discussed. Many other manifestations, which in some constitute the general crisis and decay of capitalism in its final stage of monopoly and imperialism. Most of these decay factors were already evidence, but the present economic crisis is greatly emphasizing and developing them. They sharpen the capitalist contradictions and in every direction. And just to pause here, I am reading this live. I am broadcasting this live. Typically, when I do live interaction with audience, as I did the other day, I'll do it on my X Spaces. I encourage everybody to follow me on X, same channel. And, on X, I would say, um, we can have like conversations and debates about the system. I'd love to do that. I had a great conversation with someone from the United Kingdom the other day where we really went in depth about, some of the problems in not only our shared Western system, but also some of the problems of what's going on, um, in the Iran war, et cetera, et cetera. So I really encourage that. Um, so yeah, I'm just posting this right now on X. But yeah, that's where I do a lot of interaction. This is going to be more me reading, and just kind of moving along through the book a little bit. So it's not exactly, I'm not as interactive here, but I will. But on X Spaces, I'm, obviously that's the time for us to, share the mic and talk and go back and forth, debate. You can yell at me or whatever. Um, take a ticket, get in line. Uh, anyway, so they sharpen the capitalist contradictions in every direction. They intensify the contradiction between the capitalist methods of production and exchange. They broaden and deepen the struggles between workers and capitalists, between the various capitalist countries, between the imperialist countries and the colonies, and between the two world systems represented by capitalism as a whole and the USSR. They are undermining the foundations and breaking down the very fiber of capitalism. They make more and more industrial paralysis, mass starvation, war, revolution. Some of the more outstanding of these manifestations of the growing general crisis are, without analyzing in detail the specific gravity of each, A. Overexpansion of industry. In view of the limited capacities of the capitalist markets, there is a large overexpansion of the industrial plant in all the leading capitalist countries. This constantly grows more pronounced. The United States is a striking example of this condition. It is typically illustrated by the automobile industry with a capacity estimated at 10 million cars yearly and a record output of but 4.5 million. The bitumen, I don't know what the hell to say. Coal mines with a capacity of 750 million tons of yearly and an output in 1929 of 535 million. The steel industry, with a capacity of 65 million tons and a maximum output of 56 million. Textiles, with 50% excess plant capacity. Even in the greatest boom periods, these capacities cannot be fully utilized. Such conditions, common to the most highly industrialized countries of capitalism, are not only basic causes of the economic crisis, but also prolific breeders of the ultra reactionary practices of the destruction of commodities and such dismantling industry as the present proposal to tear out 100,000 British looms and 10 million spindles. B. Chronic industrial stagnation. In the growing general crisis of capitalism, there is intensification of the whole phenomenon of the economic crisis. As Varga says, quote, crises now follow more speedily upon one another, attain a greater depth, and shake bourgeois rule more violently. Sorry, just skipping the ad. I lost track of where it was. Shake bourgeois rule more violently than before. Besides this, whole sections of the capitalist economy, even before the present crisis, had fallen into a state of more or less chronic depression. Thus, England and Germany, the one with its foreign trade ruined and the other hamstrung by its imperialist rivals, had been in practically permanent crisis since the end of the war. Besides the older industries, just a comment there. Germany is hit by reparations and England won the war, but they're both in economic crisis. So that tells you how little victory actually meant. Back to the text. Besides the older industries, coal, textiles, shipbuilding, etc., had suffered a similar stagnation in all industrial countries, including the United States. Only the newer industries, automobiles, chemicals, electrical, etc., experiencing substantial growth and expansion. As for agriculture, it had been a prolonged worldwide crisis of unprecedented dimensions, due primarily to a vast overproduction of wheat, cotton, rubber, coffee, sugar, etc., caused by the lowered buying power of the world's toilers, improved methods of production, increased acreage, etc. So we make more, can't consume it, we overproduce it because people don't have the buying capacity. This is a comment of mine, I should say. This is people don't have the buying capacity. Well, in 1932, he's talking about this, and he's talking about it in the context of what he learned from somebody who wrote about it in the 1840s all the way through. And now, in 2026, we're still talking about it. We're still dealing with it. You ever drive by a car dealership and notice how there's like 500 cars on the back lots, and they're all just sitting there, and they all look brand new and clean, and they all have brand new tech and new tires and new mirrors and new windows, and all this stuff went into putting the car together, and they shipped the car from 1,000 miles away. Sometimes they made it in a whole nother country, and they brought it here, and it sits there and it never gets purchased. You ever notice that? And yet there are people that can't afford cars. And there are, yeah. So just think about that. You have how many people who are taking public transportation, sometimes it's unsafe, and they wish they had a car, right? And they live in a place where they really don't have the infrastructure for public trans. So they go and they wish they had a car. And you go by a car dealership and there's 300 cars on the lot. And the car dealership's not selling the cars. That's our economy. Beautiful. Back to the text. The present economic crisis, despite eventual recovery here and there, will unquestionably intensify the spread of this condition of chronic industrial stagnation. At the same time that the purchasing capacity of the producing masses drops, the rationalization of industry is proceeding apace. At least on the stronger sectors of capitalism, A.T. Sloan says, for example, quote, as a result of the readjustment and refinement that is going on, our industrial machine is more efficient, more effective from every standpoint than ever before in its history. End quote. That is it exactly. More able than ever to flood the sickly market with a fresh mass of unsellable commodities. We can be sure that the present economic crisis will involve the older industries and weaker sections of capitalist economy into still deeper and more permanent stagnation. And I just want to comment here. What he's talking about is the greater efficiency of our businesses to produce more commodities that can't be purchased in the market because of the way we set up our economic system and people's purchasing power, et cetera, et cetera. But then here's another issue. In 2026, what we're talking about is AI and robotics permanently pulling humans out of the labor part and not earning any income. So it's not just that your income isn't sufficient to purchase the goods and services, but your income doesn't exist anymore. Well, if you can't purchase any goods or services, aren't we going to have glut of the highest capacity? Hmm. That's a 2026 problem being discussed in 1932. And in 1932, during the Great Depression, the American laborer isn't faced with zero income. It's faced with reduced income and reducing purchasing power. Now we're talking about zero income because we're being replaced completely. Back to the text. Permanent mass unemployment throughout the leading capitalist countries, as one of the most basic features of the growing crisis of capitalism, is an ever increasing army of unemployed. Capitalism, unable to provide work for the workers, faces permanent mass unemployment on a gigantic scale. This tendency was typically illustrated by the large army of jobless in England ever since the end of World War, and by the fact that in the United States, even during the boom period of 1929, there were at least 3 million unemployed. In Germany and England, it has reached the point where many youths graduate from school and reach manhood without ever having had a job and with little prospect of getting one. In the present economic crisis, in the present economic crisis, permanently jobless mass of workers full of fatal portent to capitalism is being added to by the many millions. The choking of international trade, one of the sure signs of the decline of capitalism, is the systemic strangling of international trade that is now taking place. This is being done principally by high tariffs and under slogans of economic nationalism and autocracy. Autocracy. Sorry, mispronouncing that. In their bitter fight for markets, the capitalist countries generally have adopted the double phased policy of high tariffs and dumping. Tariffs everywhere are at unprecedented heights and constantly going higher. Free trade, quote unquote, England has now become the leader in this reactionary movement. Just a comment, tariffs are a feature in every Western country, every capitalist economy. All the free market people believe in have tariffs and say, I mean, and not only tariffs, but we have these things called sanctions. So we love free markets, but we sanction certain countries that have competing economic and political systems. That's how little they believe in their own system. They want to sanction everybody. The reason that China isn't sanctioned is because China was employed by the West and produces many vital goods and services for the West and now has become irreplaceable. That's why they're not sanctioned. North Korea is sanctioned to the hilt. But if North Korea is using an incompetent system that people think is so easy to defeat, why do they have to sanction it? And the grip is placed like that of a powerful wrestler on his adversary. It cannot move its component parts, and though it writhes and rebels, it is helpless. End quote. Then to show what a constructive program fascism has, he jacks up the Italian tariff a few notches and launches a quote buy Italian end quote campaign to match the buy British quote unquote, buy French quote unquote, etc. movements. This economic nationalism cannot lessen but must intensify the general crisis of capitalism. The breakdown of the medium of exchange, an important sign of the general weakening of capitalism, is the breakdown of the medium of exchange in the individual countries and internationally. More than half of the capitalist world is now off the gold standard, and the percentage constantly grows in every capitalist country, including the United States. Finance reconstruction, corporation, etc. Various systems of inflating the currency are in effect. Not only are the individual capitalist countries of themselves unable to maintain a stable currency, but in their brutal struggles with each other, they are breaking down the capitalist exchange medium generally. They fight to bankrupt each other. The raid on the mark early in 1931 smashed the German and Austrian financial system, compelled the United States to grant the moratorium, and forced Germany and Austria to their knees before the French imperialism and almost provoked a gigantic economic collapse in Central Europe. The raid on the pound following soon after drove the Great Britain off the gold standard and wrecked the labor movement and deposed London as the world's money center. Then came the raid on the dollar, which cost the United States the loss of $500 million in 20 days, and which menaces the gold standard in this country. Comment, well, it's going to get a lot worse than that because we're still, at this point, 40 years away from officially coming off the gold standard. And this is before World War II, before Bretton Woods. Back to the text. All this was tied up with the uh, internecine struggle over the question of the international war debts and reparations. And just a comment, international war debts and reparations. Reparations of Germany which was blamed for World War One, even though they were not the first two entrants into the war. They were the third entrant, actually. Austria-Hungary versus was it Serbia, and then Germany backed Austria-Hungary. Um, the reparations of Germany was the reason for the creation of the Bank of International Settlements. The Bank of International Settlements is the central bank of all central banks of the Western banking system. So it's just interesting that that was the reason for its creation, quote unquote. Back to the text. The development of fascism, another of the pronounced symptoms of the decline of capitalism, is the growth of fascism in various forms in all capitalist countries. The capitalists faced with their task of drastically slashing the living standards of the workers and the poor peasants, and where political crisis is acute, the job of trying to save the capitalist system itself no longer find adequate their bourgeois democracy, of which the social democracy is a part, to hold the rebellious masses in check. Consequently, with the aid of the social democrats or social fascists, they are transforming the mass democratic, quote unquote, capitalist dictatorship into an open fascist dictatorship with its extreme demagogy and use of violence against the workers and poor peasants. Mussolini is not the symbol of a new era of capitalist development, but the sign of a decadent system of society vainly trying to hold back the clock of social progress. Just a comment here again. This is this is him basically saying that fascism isn't a separate system, but an extension of the capitalist system. It's like the emergency button for capitalism. When capitalist social democracies are failing, they use open fascism to clamp down. And this is, 1932. So think of Germany during the 1918 revolution. That didn't work, but the murdering of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht by the Freikorps. The Freikorps were like a fascist militant wing of the government, and this is the precursor to what you would imagine being like the SS, right? Well, they used to just work for the Social Democrats, and then post Hitler they become their own entity and run the government. But fascism is just an extension of capitalism. It is not a separate entity or system. It's there to is the emergency brake stop to keep the system. You could experience that right now in the U.S. I'm not somebody that calls Trump Hitler, but I recognize that there are fascist elements to what you're seeing in the government right now and our behavior. And to be honest, a lot of the German fascism is copying things that were already being done in the U.S. Like the Nuremberg laws is really a copy of Jim Crow. And eugenics was actually taken from the United States. The United States was involved in eugenics before Germany was. Um, so this is not new, and obviously American capitalists were huge financiers of, including German capitalists of Hitler and the fascists there, and same thing for Mussolini. Mussolini helped the capitalists in Italy. So anyway, back to the text. The birth of a new world system, a new world social system, the most significant of all signs of the decline of capitalism, is the rise of the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics. Capitalism no longer stands dominant in the world, with its only rival the declining remnants of feudalism. Today, it faces a new deadly rival, the forerunner of the New World Social Order. The rise of the Soviet Union enormously weakens the world capitalist system. Capitalism has thereby lost has lost territorially 1/6 of the globe and is rapidly losing more to the Chinese Soviets. It has lost control of the great markets and raw materials of what was old Russia. It suffers enormously in loss of prestige in the comparison of its industrial crisis and generally decadent conditions with the great advance of the USSR. It confronts the deadly menace of its workers inspired and organized by this great example of the success of socialism. And all these losses and dangers for capitalism in the rise of the USSR will increase as time goes on. To the foregoing signs of the growing capitalist crisis and decline, many more could be added, including the increase of the socially parasitic classes of the mere bond clippers, the growth of artificial stimulants for the market, such as installment buying, the reversion of pre-capitalist forms of production and barter, the smothering of inventions and improved methods of production, but most significant are the menacing danger of war and the worldwide revolutionary upsurge of the toiling masses. So just to comment here, again, 1932, this is not today, but you see a lot of similarities. The difference is the Soviet Union is a straight rival from the beginning and was directly invaded by the US, among other countries, whereas China was, and as the comparison, China today is the largest communist, party and state. China was employed by the West in order to help provide an off ramp for decaying capitalism and imperialism, and the Chinese took that on, used it to grow, and technologically have now surpassed the United States, and their economy is going to surpass the United States. So now they're a rival. Whereas the Soviet Union was not born as an employer of the West, but was born as a rival of the West because it basically decided to step away from the Tsar. The Tsar was actually chasing the Western system, married a Western girl from Germany, attempted to be the West in every way, shape, and form. The Soviets did the opposite, where the Soviet Union was saying, we don't want to be them. We're gonna follow Karl Marx, and we're going to institute a socialist state run by the Bolsheviks, etc. So, just a totally different mentality. Um, let's see if I have time for a little bit more. All right. Read another page or so. So the war danger. It's the subtext. Uh, War is inevitable under the capitalist system. Imperialism is the era of great world wars. The capitalists, imperialists consciously use war as a weapon for furthering. Oops, I didn't realize I paused that. Sorry. Um, the capitalist imperialists consciously use war as a weapon for furthering their interests, just as they do tariffs and dumping. Sound familiar? They cold they cold-bloodedly send millions to slaughter in order to eliminate their imperialist competitors and to reduce whole populations to their programs of exploitation. Comment. Back then, again, as the book says, the main competitor for capitalism was feudalism and former slavery. Then you have this new rising competitor and rival in socialism. In modern times, the competitors are again other capitalist countries and some that are not socialist, but Iran is anti imperialist. It's not socialist, but it's anti imperialist. Why? It doesn't allow imperialist countries to come in and exploit their resources. So those become rivals. In the years following this book, you're going to see wars by capitalist countries against other capitalists, but mainly against anti-imperialists, whether they're socialist or not. Okay, that's the difference. So anyway, back to the text. The general crisis of capitalism, with its vastly sharpening antagonisms, is fast driving capitalism to a new world war. Well, there you go. In fact, war is already here in Manchuria and China proper. Only 14 years after the great, quote, war to end all war, end quote, we stand on the brink of a still more frightful shambles. How deliberately capitalists consider war as a necessary part of their business was shown by the New York correspondent of the London Daily Telegraph, who December 23rd, 1916, wrote, the quote, the rumors of peace which were current during the last week caused alarm on the New York Exchange and a sharp drop in the value of bonds. The price of wheat dropped heavily. Everybody is talking about the disasters which will occur upon the conditions of peace, end quote. Now the capitalists of the world are just as cynically looking to war as the broad way out of the present crisis. They see in mass murder on the battlefields the way to make business good with bonanza profits for themselves. Okay, I have to just comment here. I'm sorry. That's a brutal quote. And let me just reread this. This is coming from the New York correspondent of the London Daily Telegraph, okay, on December 23rd, 1916. And remember, World War I is 1914 to 1918, but the United States doesn't enter the war until like 1917 officially. And for the fact that the New York Stock Exchange saw a dip in the commodity price of wheat because they thought that, or I'm sorry, in the price of the value of the bonds, just because the price of wheat drops because of the potential peace. Does that sound familiar? Like right now, the price of oil is shooting up, right? And the price of oil would come down if you had peace. So people on Wall Street and in other areas of London City, etc., they're betting against peace because of the potential to make more profit. So innocent people, families are wrecked permanently. How many innocent young men and women died in World War One and World War II for a war, while people made money by betting against the peace of those wars? That's what they're talking about here. That war is a tool to help get the U.S. out of the Great Depression, just like it's a tool to help line the pockets of the defense contractors in current modern day. It's the same concept. It's pretty scary, right? Back to the text. There is circulating propaganda among the unemployed workers that war is the only way to restart the crippled industries, to do away with the unemployment. They prepare war to beat back the advancing world revolution, to overthrow the Soviet Union. The cynical militarist General William Mitchell says, quote, many nations think that at this time a foreign war would do them a great deal more good than domestic insurrection and revolution, end quote. But capitalism characteristically hides its war plans behind a mask of pacifism. This is to throw dust in the eyes of the masses who would rebel against a frank statement of imperialist war aims. As the war nears, the capitalists multiply their camouflage peace conferences, disarmament meets, etc., behind which the preparations for war proceed ever faster. For modern warfare, pacifism is just as necessary as airplanes. It is characteristic of capitalist pacifist hypocrisy that the principal architect of the militaristic French imperialism, Briand, is hailed as the great apostle of the international peace. The League of Nations comment is that's the precursor to the United Nations. Back to text. The League of Nations is not a peace striving institution, as the capitalists and their social fascist flunkies would have us believe. It is grouping of imperialist bandits intent only upon their schemes of mass exploitation and war making. The Kellogg Pact, instead of being, as Nicholas M. Butler says, the quote, the supreme act of the age in which we live, end quote, is a monstrous lure to blind the masses to the slaughter that is being prepared. In Manchuria, Japan, a member of the League and a signer of the pact wiped its feet on this scrap of paper and exposed the League of Nations' imperialist character. And what could be more bankrupt than the present disarmament conference of the League now being held in Geneva? The social fascists and bourgeois pacifists who support the various peace plans of the capitalist governments, while at the same time they vote for war budgets, are only cat's paws. They play the game of imperialism by creating illusions among the masses that the warlike capitalist governments actually want peace. Only by the mass resistance of the workers can the war plans of capitalists be delayed. Only when the toiling masses have defeated the world bourgeois can war be abolished altogether. So let me just pause here. Um, and again, for those who are just joining, I've just been recording this uh, and streaming. So the point is that we have war is used as a tool, and war is a tool of capitalists and imperialists in order to not only acquire new land and exploit new resources and new people, but it's also a tool to escape the the conditions internally, right? And there's a pacifist mask that's puts on where people pretend to want peace, but in reality they don't. And the economics prove it, because if you see the correspondent note where the price of the bonds is in danger, and um the wheat price is hurt because of the potential peace in World War I. That America is sitting there excited to make money in World War I because of the destruction. That's really what you need to know right there. So anyway, I will resume reading this book probably at a later part of the book as I read it on my own. So I'll probably pick this up, in a later chapter. But I did want to continue reading it. So I might pick this up in, a few pages down the line or whatnot. But I'm going to keep doing these. Yeah, this is just to kind of share the book, share the text, share my comments about the text, and try to relate it back to today. Try to relate it back to what's going on in 2026. And there's so many parallels between what William Z. Foster is experiencing. Obviously, we're not in the Great Depression, but we are in economic decline, and what he's experiencing and the people's feelings towards looking at a new system, and him explaining some of the issues of capitalism and some of the potential of another system which is going to come about in the later chapters. This is really why I wanted to read some of this. And William Z. Foster, unlike Karl Marx and Engels and Lenin and Stalin and all these other revolutionaries, Foster is an American. And he would eventually be part of the the Communist Party of the United States, um, which is still around today, but has it's changed over the years. But nonetheless, it's just important to read this and understand the context of what he's talking about and relate it to today. And hopefully, it inspires you to understand that you're not going through something different, but it is a lesson that has to be learned, and that we can finally take the steps forward. So I appreciate your time and attention and everything, and I'll keep doing this. Please take a look at the channel for other content I've put out. I talk about just market related things, as well as other political issues and commentary. And I've been making some shorts or some videos that I've also put on TikTok under the same channel name, and I'm on X, where you can interact with me there. And we do X Spaces also here. So on the X Spaces, we just let it rip. Come in, talk, yell at me, confront me, debate me, whatever. I record all those, so they're out there forever. And this channel is done. There's no profit. I don't make any money off of it. I do this because it's my intellectual interest and something that I just want to do my part in hopefully changing the direction of people's minds. And I'll continue to do it. It's an expression of me. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody. And, everyone have a